attentively. Got it.
Welcome this evening to this meeting of the Windsor and Ascot Development Management Committee on the 6th of March 2025. My name is Councillor Neil Knowles and I will be chairing this meeting. This meeting is being held in person, via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. Firstly, it would be useful if all the committee members and officers could introduce themselves so the public are aware of who is who in this meeting and the role that they're undertaking. Obviously, I am the chair, Councillor Neil Knowles, to my right.
Councillor Mark Wilson, Vice Chair and voting member of the panel.
Councillor Devon Davis, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Julian Teasy, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Amy Teasy, voting member of the panel.
Councillor David Buckley, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Julian Sharp, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Sanara Luxton, voting member of the panel.
Kimberly, clerk to the committee.
Claire Pugh, principal planning officer. Jo Richards, development management team leader.
Louise Reid, deputy head of planning.
I request, that meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I've invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and the capacity in which you are speaking, if appropriate. I'll also ask officers to speak at appropriate times during the meeting. If any individual attempts to disrupt the meeting, I am able to use my powers in the constitutions to adjourn the meeting or have the individual removed. I'd also like to remind councillors that to improve our time and effectiveness as a committee, if you could please limit the repetition of points or questions which have always been raised by others. Where possible, please put forward all new points or questions which you would like raised during your request to speak. We will now start on the agenda items, but before we do progress, I'd just like to spare a moment for us to think of Councillor David Hilton, who passed away recently. David was omnipresent on planning for as long as I can remember. And certainly when I got thrown onto it after the election in 2019, he was very helpful. Probably the epitome of a really good local councillor, helpful to everybody, no matter what cloth you were politically. So David will be missed, I think, by all of us going forward. The meeting format we trialled in Maidenhead the other week will proceed this time around. We'll do the normal presentation, the questions from the public, which we don't have any tonight, but if there were, then we did have them addressed by officers. And then the next phase would be the members to ask questions to clarify points. And then once questions have been asked, then to move on to the debate phase, where we go into the division phase. We found it sort of compartmentalised the meeting a bit better, made it a little more efficient. So that's how we will proceed. On now to the agenda. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Karen Davis.
And agenda item number 2, any declarations of interest? David.
Chair, yes, I'd like to declare being ward councillor of item 1, but I come to the meeting with an open mind.
Councillor Luxton.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to advise, for me, it's item 2. Whilst not a declarable interest under the Code of Conduct, I have to advise that I'm very well acquainted with the applicants on the second application, reference 24022369 full, and accordingly, to avoid any suggestion of bias on my part, I shall take no part in the decision making and shall leave the meeting when this is called.
Thank you very much, Councillor Luxton. Item 3 is to approve the meetings of the meeting held on the 6th of February I think there's only a few of us here who are here on the 6th of February. Those here, does everybody agree that the minutes as published are a true record of the meeting?
Agree.
Agreed. I'll put that to one side. On now to agenda item number 4, which is planning application to land to the rear of 38 to 80 Coppermill Road, Wraysbury in Staines. And I will ask, I believe it's Claire, who will be presenting the information about this application. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, before I start with the presentation of the item, I just thought I'd draw your attention to an update report. So that's just clarifying on reason for refusal 2, which relates to design. An addition of failure to comply with criterion I, policy QP3, which is in relation to minimising the visual impact of traffic and parking. It was highlighted in the report as a non-compliance, but it's added into that reason for refusal. And then also on page 26 of the main committee reports, reference was made to the parking standards in the neighbourhood plan, and the table extract didn't come through, so that's just in the update report for your information. Okay, thank you. I'll move on to the presentation. So I thought in terms of, it's a sort of more unusual site and the way the planning balance is done, so I thought it'd be useful to give the context, the way the planning balance has been done first, and then move into the plans and the detailed considerations. So before you is an extract from the adopted local plan, and you can see the AL40A allocation, which is pointed out on that drawing, and it's within the green belt. It's within a settlement within the green belt, which is what the yellow shading is. So it's an allocated site for housing, but it remains in the green belt, and that's what the plan shows. So this is just setting out how the planning balance has been done. So it's an allocation for housing. As I said, it's not removed from the green belt. So for the purposes of this scheme, it's considered that the development is inappropriate development within the green belt. There's definitional harm. It doesn't fall under the exceptions in the framework to inappropriate development. There's harm to openness, which I can go into when I do the presentation. And then conflict, one of the purposes, which is safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. So when you do the balancing in the green belt, you have to consider, are there other considerations which clearly outweigh the harm to the green belt, but also the other harms arising, and that's set out within paragraph 153 of the framework. So in officer's opinion, there are not other considerations that clearly outweigh the green belt harm and the other harms identified. And again, I will go through that in more detail as we go through the presentation. So in that case, when you come to that conclusion, then a case of very special circumstances doesn't exist. And so in terms of the tilted balance, normally, if you're not restricted by sort of greenbelt or other things in footnote 7, which takes you out of that, you'd have the presumption in favour of sustainable development. In this case, it doesn't apply because we're saying there's not a case of very special circumstances. But I just wanted to make the point that as this is an allocated site, if you did have a policy compliance scheme and it met the performer requirements, you'd probably end up coming to the conclusion that there was a case of very special circumstances, in which case the tilted balance would be engaged. So I'm just making that sort of distinction because I think it's important to know that sort of going forward, but for the purposes of this scheme, it's not engaged tilted balance. So I hope that makes sense, and I'm happy to clarify once I've gone through the slides. So in terms of the way that the balance has been done, as I say, paragraph 153 of the framework sets out the way you do that. So local planning authorities are required to ensure substantial weight is given to any harm to the green belt. So that can be definitional harm, including the harm to openness, conflict with purposes. And it says that inappropriate development is by definition harmful, should not be approved except in very special circumstances. And those very special circumstances can't exist unless you've got the other considerations that clearly outweigh greenbelt harms and the other harms. And so, yeah, this is the extract from the local plan performer in the local plan for this site. So it gives the the sort of indication for the number of houses that can go on the site, which is approximately 24. And then there's a number of criteria that's required to be met. So it's just delivering a high quality scheme that fronts onto Coppermill Road and respects the character of the neighbouring residential units and the openness of the green belt. There's also other requirements about preventing access to the reservoir to the east of the site, having appropriate mitigation measures for impacts of noise and air quality from Heathrow Airport, protecting trees worthy of retention and providing a soft landscaping strategy to reflect the character of the local street scene, consider the flood risk as part of a flood risk assessment as the site's larger than 1 hectare, providing mitigations for surface water flood risk, having a SUD scheme, and then the provision of 40% affordable housing. And then you've got all of the other development plan policies that are relevant, which have been considered. So in terms of that balancing that I've talked about, and again, I'll go into more detail of that when we go through the scheme, there are benefits that weigh in favour of this scheme. It will provide 26 houses, and that will make a contribution to the council's 5-year housing land supply. It's providing housing on an allocated site for housing. You have the economic benefits from the construction period, but then also the operational period when the occupants are in and the spend with that. As part of the scheme, public open space is proposed, which could be used by the existing and future existing occupants of Coppermill Road, but also future occupiers of these dwellings. The housing would be provided in a sustainable location, and then it would provide family housing, which is needed in the borough. However, this is giving a reduced weight because it's not meeting the housing mix required by policy. And then in terms of the harms weighing against the scheme, there's identified harm to the character of this area, which I will explain more in detail soon. The failure to provide affordable housing. So I'll draw on that now, actually. So a viability assessment was submitted with this application, which shows that affordable housing can't be provided on site or an off-site contribution. So the conclusions of that report have been independently reviewed by a consultant, and the results of that assessment aren't disputed, in that there are perhaps some disagreements with some inputs and outputs, but the ultimate conclusion by both parties is it's not viable to provide affordable housing. But there is a conflict with policy, but I think in terms of this scheme, because it's quite it's a high spec development, it's the build costs that are driving up, and that's what's sort of triggering not being viable. And we have got guidance in the affordable housing SPD, which talks about when designing schemes, it's looking at different options to sort of maximise viability. So, and in this case, that hasn't been demonstrated. So that's a reason for refusal. The failure to provide an appropriate housing mix is another one. Probably don't need to show you the plans for that, but in terms of the provision of, there's an over provision of 4-bed houses, which far exceeds the housing requirement in the housing mix policy. And then the smaller units as well, that it doesn't meet the policy requirements on that. So the mix of housing proposed is not meeting the policy requirements. And then moving on to the pedestrian environment, which again, I'll show you the plans, and perhaps I'll explain that in more detail, but it's the failure to provide a suitable pedestrian environment for future occupiers of this development. There's a failure to demonstrate biodiversity would not be harmed, and specifically bats and hedgehogs. And then failure to evidence the biodiversity net gain condition is capable of successfully being discharged. And that's to do with the baseline habitat that's put into the metric, and there's just sort of discrepancies between some of the information in different documents. And I think obviously the local planning authority has to be satisfied that what's put into the metric as the baseline is accurate. So that's put on as a reason for refusal. Failure to evidence appropriate tree planting can be provided, and that will become apparent when I go through the plans, hopefully. Failure to demonstrate the development's been designed to mitigate against climate change. There's just lack of information explaining how the scheme's to be designed to take account of the sustainability supplementary planning documents through the submitted energy statement. And then failure to demonstrate the impact of traffic and parking has been minimised, which goes into the harm to the character of the area reason. And then there's a neighbourhood plan requirement about evidence of engagement with the parish council or local communities. And there's no evidence that that's been done. So those are all the harms weighing against it. So when you're looking at the VSC test and are there considerations, I think there's so many things weighing against it that you can't say the VSC exists. And probably noticing there's always going to be a green belt harm with housing going on this site, because it's always, you know, unless it can be one of the exceptions, that is. So you'll always get that harm, but the other harms could be reduced in that balancing exercise. Sorry, to give some water. So yeah, so before you was the site location plan, which just shows you the site we're talking about. Sorry. And then some photographs of the existing site. So this is from Coppermill Road, looking towards the southern end of the application site, and you can see the trees that front the existing site, and there's a grass verge outside it. It's just another street scene towards the application site. And then this is from Coppermill Road, looking towards the northern part of the application site. So again, well, you can't see the site much. It's quite well screened by existing trees, but you can see the embankment up to the Wraysbury Reservoir behind it. And then this is within the application site, and this is a view looking north towards number 37 Coppermill Road. And then in the other direction, south within the application site, towards the Thames Water building. And then these are photographs of the existing street scene. So in the northern part of the opposite to the northern part of the application site tends to be bungalows, but they've got pitched or hipped roofs. There are flat roof dormers in this area. And then this is another street scene shot from number 56, looking south. And you can see it rises up to 2-storey dwellings. But again, the roof forms tend to be pitched. And then this is from the southern end of the site, looking at number 80 Coppermill Road onwards. So you can see the dwellings do vary in the area, but they do have some sort of common themes with their roofscape. And the use of materials is quite simplistic, in that there's not lots of different materials applied generally. And it's just another example of the street scene. So this is the proposed site plan, which you can see the housing, the accesses proposed. And I've just marked on this plan the existing pavement, because part of the reason with the pedestrian environment not being suitable is that outside this application site is a grass verge, it's highways land. But in terms of those future occupiers, they could cross over the road to the other side of the pavement, but no crossing is proposed. But otherwise you're sort of forced out onto the road to walk, and that's just showing where the pavement starts and the sort of pedestrian connectivity around there. And that's just a more sort of zoomed in site plan, so you can see the proposed houses, and you can see down the southern end of the smaller units with the 2-bed units in, and then roughly centrally there's the public open space proposed, green space. And this is just giving that more detail, so you can see the parking provision. It's the site split in 2 halves of how that layout works. And then on this presentation, this is the tree constraints plan, and if you can see, the red sort of trees marked on the frontage are all shown for removal on that. Landscaping is a reserve matter, so it's not something to consider now, but actually I think what you do have to be satisfied or need evidence of is that sufficient mitigation planting can be put in, and noticing that if you've got accesses in the front, you've got to sort of ensure you're not impacting on visibility displays. So scheme hasn't sort of demonstrated that it could have retained any of the trees on the frontage, which was the requirement of the performer. And then turning to the street scene, so you can see the top photo is obviously the existing street scene because there's no development on the site at present. And then below that are the proposed dwellings. So you can see they're very the contemporary in design. Most of them have flat roofs. The materials sort of vary across them, Yes, I'll move on to the next one, which just gives a bit of more detail of the dwellings and how they would look within the street scene. And I just thought in terms of actually, because a lot of this will come down to the design of it and whether it fits in with the character of the area. So this just gives in sort of more detail so you can see the design, the application of the different materials to the certain dwelling types. Some of the dwellings at the smaller dwellings at the end. So in terms of, you've got the green belt harm, which I've identified. So in terms of the character, and this primarily comes down to, in officers' view, the bulk of the dwellings doesn't respect that of the existing buildings in the area, and that is a requirement of the Design Guidance SPD, which supports the local plan policy on design. And then in terms of the application of the materials, some of the materials are that they, as proposed, like the render is common in the area, but most of the materials on the dwellings, they don't pick up on the materials. And I think in terms of certainly plots 22 to 24, it's that application of quite a few different materials, which again is out of keeping with a sort of more simplistic material palette in the area. And then in terms of, and roofscape's another thing, which again is in the SPD about picking up on the roofscape of buildings in the local area. So, you know, flat roofs in this case, apart from having flat roof dormers on some of the dwellings, that's just not the prominent roofscape. So, and then in terms of the other requirements of policy QP3A, it's about demonstrating the sustainable design and construction, which, as I've highlighted, that it doesn't evidence that. And then in terms of that tree front, retaining important trees and how the scheme does that, that's not been demonstrated. And in terms of the number of accesses proposed, some of them accesses are shared accesses, but you've also got single accesses. So it's just that the failure to demonstrate how it's been designed to minimise that impact. So I'll just move on. So I think I've touched upon the affordable housing. It doesn't meet the policy requirement. It's the viability assessment isn't disputed what they've submitted with this scheme, but I think that sort of ties in with, there's a linkage between the two in terms of, if you consider that, you know, this type of development is out of keeping with the character, but it's also the high spec build is affecting the viability of the scheme. And certainly in terms of the affordable housing SPD requirements, different options to look at what if something viable could be provided for this site has been tested or not presented to the local planning authority. The housing mix I have touched upon before, but just in terms of the local plan policy requirements, you would expect 15% to be 1 bedroom, 30% of the houses to be 2 bedroom, 35% to be 3 bedroom, and 20% to be 4 bedroom. In this case, 17 of the units, so that's 65% of 4 beds. So you've got 15% of 3 beds, so it's under delivering on the percentage of 3 beds required, and then under providing on the 2 beds, and there's no 1 bed. So, I mean, you might have a little bit of sort of difference between the mix in that target, but this is cuts quite a bit out. So I've touched upon the trees, which I won't repeat here again. In terms of the ecology, this is down to the survey that's been submitted, and certainly further surveys in the view of the council's ecologist are needed, and the trees on the site which have been assessed, because of ivy being present, the council's ecologist advises that emergent surveys should be done. And I think you obviously have to take a precautionary approach with ecology, protected species. So that's on as a reason for refusal. It's potentially if more surveys were done, that could be overcome, but it's just the absence of that information. And I won't go through biodiversity net gain again. And then in terms of the sort of highway or the transport reasons, in terms of highway safety, there aren't considered to be reasons for refusal on that. This comes down to the pedestrian environment, and planning policy is clear at the national and local level about giving priority to pedestrians first. And I think sort of that's not the consideration of how this scheme has done that. So I think that sort of identifies the benefits, the concerns, the balancing that's been done. And so in this case, the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. We don't have a speaker at all on this application. So if I can ask the panel if they have any questions to raise to indicate in the normal manner, and we'll go to the examination bit of it. Anybody? Councillor Beckley.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say, thank you to the officer. It's one of the most detailed, informative presentations. I've had the pleasure of sitting on this panel since I was elected in 2023. So thank you for that. You've answered so many of the questions that we probably have as a panel. But I've got one. Basically, on the open space that's being presented by the applicant, and we're talking about pedestrianisation here, I'm presuming that there'll be children on this development. How would they reach that open space? Because we discussed about going out onto the road, and they'd have to cross the road and then cross back to get to the open space if they lived at either end of the development.
Yeah.
Claire,
thank you. I think that's sort of is the other thing. It's not just about people walking to the train station. It's about that open space which is publicly accessible. And as you point out, there is not a pedestrian footway proposed, or so it's not been designed taking into account pedestrians first for this.
Is that fine?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Councillor Davies.
Thank you. So I have two questions. First one, both relating to Greenbelt land. First one, in previous applications, we've heard of areas that were in the Greenbelt but were then taken out because they're in the borough local plan. This site is in the borough local plan, so why is it still considered in the Greenbelt?
Claire,
yeah, so I think it's quite an unusual situation when you've got an allocated site that remains in the green belt. I think the reasoning for this is it's quite a sort of small strip of land, and just to remove that one section when it's surrounded by green belt didn't make sense when the local plan was putting sites forward. But Louise might want to expand on that.
Louise.
Yes, can you hear me okay? Yeah, it's also, I think, to do with the sensitivity of the site as well, that it's setting a higher bar on this one than it has done on the sites that have been removed from the green belt. So I think together with what Claire has just mentioned, it's both really.
One more question also on Greenbelt. National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 154 sets out reasons why development could be considered appropriate. Part E is limited infilling. Your report does mention it, says that this is not considered limited. So are we to assume that 26 houses is not considered limited? But then in the local plan, this site is allocated for 24 developments. How could a developer be selling limited infilling while also providing approximately 24 developments?
Claire?
I'll try and answer that. So I think they're different things in terms of the site being an allocation for housing. That's not looking at whether it's limited infilling to be an exception to an appropriate development. So you see what I mean? There's an allocation for housing. The inspector wasn't looking at, does this meet the, if it was an exception to an appropriate development in the green belt, then you just assess it as that and it would be going forwards. I think in terms of, as my report sets out, the site is quite big. It's in relation to the existing houses on Coppermill Road. It's of a substantial size, so it wouldn't be considered limited infilling for the purposes of the green belt policy and the exception to an appropriate development.
I mean, what I would add that the fact that it is an allocation and that it has been through the examination process would be given weight in any event. So there is a starting point of weight attached because of that allocation.
Brilliant to see.
Thank you. Just a few questions actually. I mean, one of the things that is striking about the look and feel of houses is that they look very modern, whereas the the existing houses look very sort of quite old fashioned, as it were. I'm just interested about that because the scale, the height does appear to be similar to what's there currently. They're bungalow height, as it were, although I know there's a couple of 2 stories. Is that this is always going to be a balance, isn't it? But is this essentially saying, well, you can't really have modern houses in an area that is quite old, as it were? Is that because that would be a shame? But is that your interpretation of planning policy?
Let
Thank you. No, and I think the office report does say the policy that this is assessed against doesn't object to contemporary design. This is more about the bulk, the form of it. So it's having flat roofs, the application of the materials. I think, potentially, provided it meets the criteria that's set out in the SVD, contemporary is not a problem in principle, but it has to, you're not going to match necessarily what's in the local area exactly, and perhaps you wouldn't want to, but you would pick up on sort of the roof form, the bulk, the massing, the material palette. You'd pick up the sort of cues to respect the local character.
One more question. Yes. So going back to the question about the pedestrian thing. I mean, it's interesting that would it be right in suggesting that the reason is that for this issue is that park that they're adding in there, which, I mean, other things being equal might suggest, well, that's a good thing to have, a bit of open space. But obviously, if you create open space, then you sort of invite people to it, as it were. The site doesn't include the road, but the highway itself. I just wonder, is that something that could be conditioned away with, I mean, this would be the highway that we add a pedestrian crossing or something like that, if we were minded to approve.
Claire, if we could.
Yeah, sorry. And Louise can correct me on this, but I think the red line would have needed to include the highway ridge if that was part of the proposal as well. I mean, it's highway land, so appropriate notice would need to be served on the highway authority as well. So no, I don't think you can condition that.
Louise, if you can add.
Yeah, I'd agree with that we would have had to have those discussions with highways before the application even came in, and it would be secured through 278 in the legal agreement. So because those discussions haven't taken place, all the properties just go straight onto a grass version road.
Yeah, I think that the only thing, I mean, that sounds sensible. The only, my worry is, I suppose, law of unintended consequences, that one way they could get around that is by not having a park, and almost adding, a 27th and a 28th plot there, make a bit more money, which would be a shame if that's, because you need to get an appropriate balance. But would that be your understanding, that actually this issue wouldn't arise if they just put another couple of plots there?
I'm sorry, yeah, through you, Chair. No, I think it's not just about the open space, because those people living in those houses still need a safe pedestrian environment to walk. So maybe the open space sort of compounds that, in that you've got a central space that attracts people. But even if you took that away, had houses in there, people still have a movement to make, and whether that's going to the train station to walk,
Can I just, again, I'm not quite sure about this. Maybe did I misunderstand it? Is there on that side of the road an ordinary footpath? Because it looks like there was on the map, but I couldn't quite see. I couldn't when I looked at the where is it? It's not this one. It's in the main documents, but there was a bus stop that suggested that was, or is that bus stop in the road?
Sorry.
Claire,
Yeah, I'll come back and then you can add. So there's a bus stop on the grass verge. It's a grass verge.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's not a pavement.
Fine.
Sorry.
Okay, that was a misunderstanding on my part. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Chair, can I?
Oh, sorry, Councillor Luxton.
Thank you, Chair.
Apologise.
I see relevant planning history. that this had come as a pre-application advice was obtained for 33, alternative scheme of 33 dwellings. So this went back, and this is the new one that came after your application advice.
Yes, so I think, yes, a pre-application on quite a different scheme for 33 dwellings was obtained. So before this.
Okay, but for the same site, or was it for a different?
For this site, yes.
For this site, okay. Thanks.
Any more, Councillor Lewson?
No.
Councillor Amy Tissot.
Thank you. So just moving on from what Councillor Luxon said, so they didn't therefore obtain submission advice for this application, the application advice for this one.
That's correct.
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to make that clear.
So Julian Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that comes out in your report is that these are very high quality houses, and because of that, that's meant that the viability for affordable housing has been used as a reason for not putting affordable housing on here. And what you seem to be saying in the report is that it should be built out of in a more standardized build, which would have lowered build costs. So does that mean that as a borough, because you've obviously picked it out as policy, we've got a policy which says the houses should be built of a lower quality rather than a higher quality in the borough?
Yes, Claire, if you could answer.
Yeah, so I think in terms of, I don't think I'm trying to get across build low quality homes. I think it's about the higher specification, and this was sensitivity tested by the independent consultant that did the appraisal for the council. So it's just using the standard build cost for a normal housing scheme, and if you did it in accordance with your tip, and it's not low quality, it's just the standardized build costs approach, that would have generated an affordable housing contribution. This scheme is it's high spec, and I think that's what BPS are saying, that the build costs are higher because it's not your standardized build. So it's not saying build low quality housing. I think for this there's a linkage, because as in the view of officers, the dwellings don't respond to the character of the area anyway, so there's a concern about the design not being appropriate for this area. And then you've got this other reason in terms of it's a policy requirement to provide affordable housing. It's on the site performer. It's it's policy HO3. Nothing's being provided, and it's about exploring alternative options that could potentially deliver affordable housing to meet policy.
So I'm just trying to understand really what we're saying there, because are you saying that if they built it with a lower quality house, and then they could have therefore afforded to build additional houses with the money that they got left over from the lower quality houses that they built? So you put more houses on there. Is that what we're saying? Or they should just have 26 lower quality houses rather than 26 high quality houses, and some of those houses should be 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom houses, which is what the policy says we need, rather than 4-bedroom houses which of a high quality, which the developer seems to think he wants to build. I'm trying to just unpack what our policy is actually about, because we seem to be, from this, encouraging developers to build lower quality houses rather than higher quality houses. And I think that's a real concern actually for people who are buying houses in this area.
Louise, if I can invite you to reply.
I think we need to take a step back here, because I think when you look at the viability assessment, it is publicly available. So you're welcome to have a quick check if you want. It's more to do with the figures they put in for the build cost. So it's not about the quality of the development per se. It's the fact that they're putting in very high build costs. And what we ask so it's, the materials they're using are very expensive. It's more to do with that than the quality of the development per se. And what we asked the independent assessor to do was to apply the more normal range of figures that still provide good quality housing. It's not about providing substandard housing, it's providing a normal range of figures. The build costs here are exceptionally high, and that's really what we were picking up on. So, and what the both national and local policies require us is to look at, you know, the balance here, you know, that there are alternative options they can consider that would bring down that abnormally high, you know, materials cost and build cost, and bring it into a realm where they can actually deliver the affordable housing, because that is what the local plan based this on. They based it on, as you know, a fairly standardised per square foot build cost, not at the bottom by any means, but a standard one that we have across probably 90% of our developments. There's no reason to justify anything exceptional here. You might get exceptional build costs when you're dealing with a development that's linking in with heritage assets and so on, where there is a need to replicate certain things that are costly to do. But that isn't the case here. We've got fairly, you know, sort of, as you said, fairly sort of traditional dwellings around of, hip bungalows, hip roof bungalows, and two-storey buildings that are quite low scale and have, you know, first floor accommodation in the roof space and so on. So it's all very low key, and there's a dominance of materials of brick and render, which in their own right are not costly, but they still result in good quality development. So I think perhaps it's a bit misleading to say it's about the high quality of the development. It's about the high cost of the materials that they're putting forward. So it's not about quality per se, it's about specs that they've put forward in their viability assessment. And you know, on the face of it, that does mean that it discounts it brings up the cost considerably, and it discounts the ability to provide affordable housing. Does that make sense at all? I can clarify further if it's not coming through.
No, it makes perfect sense.
Can you
Can I? Yeah.
But and I accept what you say, but actually that's not what the report says. It talks about the unique and high specification of the development, not the fact that they put in high costs.
I'm reading number 3 of the information to project, and it says it does not provide affordable housing through a sufficiently robust viability assessment demonstrating the different design options explored to ensure on-site affordable housing is optimised. In my belief, I think that applies to every development, really, doesn't it? It is a bit of a juggling match to try and meet the target.
I mean, I think it's interesting that the developers tried to do that and tried to, I don't know whether they've overcosted something or overspec'd something, but somewhere or other they're obviously trying to use supposedly high quality materials for this building, or these buildings, and that's tipped the balance so that they can't actually then afford to build the affordable homes.
I don't think anybody can presume what the development mind, you know.
No.
Richard,
Just
can I just hand over to Councillor Luxton? She's been waiting a while to ask.
Thank you. My understanding is that they're using expensive material. Is that right? So that is why the cost has gone up. It's not because it's any sort of, say they've done concrete is better than what normal people would use, the normal housing. And they're doing something special on the concrete. Is that what you're trying to say, the material? Or the brick, instead of having 1 centimeter, they're using 5 centimeters. I'm just making things up in my head. Is that what you mean? That's why the cost is up, because the material they're using is not to what standard is.
Then a lot of it isn't standard materials now. And there's quite a variety of materials, which they, you know, because not all the it's probably a complex area going into this, but obviously if you're building 24 dwellings and they were using similar materials, then there's economies of scale. But when you're using a lot of different materials, then it makes a difference. And these are very high spec materials, and they're not materials that we would necessarily find in nearby properties, such as the dark brick, such as the split stone, such as the Tokyo timber cladding, and so on. They're unusual materials, and they are quite costly.
So I'm a bit confused here now. So are you saying that the borough, if somebody is using something that exceptional to make it look better, that's not in our policies, so we can't give permission for that?
It's not that, it's more to do with the fact that what's been picked up in the officer's report is that there is also an issue around the design of the buildings in their own right.
Yeah.
In that
Got
there
that.
is an issue with them not working well within their context. I mean, the flat roof is a classic example, the mixture of materials that are alien in the context and so on. So it's more to do with that. It's not to do with necessarily just the cost issue. The cost, what the material cost has done, the build cost has done, has because obviously when you're building every property differently and using materials in different places, that pushes up a build costs for the actual builders going on site. So there's lots of reasons that build cost has been as high as it is. That's not to say it's necessarily wrong, but we would be looking to maximise the the delivery on the site for affordable housing, and that is within our policies, and they should have looked at other options.
Okay.
It doesn't mean to say they can't have a high quality build on there, but it needs to reflect the policies of the plan, which it's not doing.
Okay, that's what I was trying to say, clarify that. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
Questions complete on this one? If so, thank you very much for topping up our information. I'd like to open the floor if people want to discuss what we've heard, what we've read, and what we think. Councillor Davis.
So we started off with 10 reasons for refusal. Despite our best efforts, we're still at 10 reasons for refusal. Don't think there's much what you said about that. We tried our best to scrutinise, and once again, the planning team have defended all their points. So I don't think you're not going to be able to disagree with that. So I'll don't mind motioning that we refuse in line with officer's recommendations.
Thank you. Kevin Devon Davis is proposed to support the officer's recommendation to reject the application. Any more conversation? Councillor Amy, do you think?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up a few things. Obviously, we've discussed that this is an allocated site, but it is still in the green belt, and so we have to hold it to a higher standard when deciding whether it's reasonable and there are very special circumstances to build on it. And I don't think that we can see in this case that they have outweighed the harm to the green belt. The lack of affordable housing, I think it is a concern, as Councillor Sharp was saying, that they've essentially priced themselves out of providing that affordable housing. And when you compare the build spec of all the different materials, it's like they've just thrown everything at it. You know, when the houses around look like fairly standard rendered properties. And I am concerned that this is a ploy to get round providing affordable housing, and I really would hope that other developers don't follow suit. You know, we can't just be building expensive houses for wealthy people and stick everything into it. One thing I'm particularly concerned about that came out in the report is the lack of engagement with the community, lack of engagement with parish councils, parish councillors. I asked my colleague next to me, Councillor David Buckley, whether Councillor Larkham was going to be here this evening. To not engage with, you know, passionate members of the community at the earliest stage who know the area best, I think is a real mistake. And obviously that is against our policy, that's required. For me, there's just too many unanswered questions in the report as well. It doesn't explain how that wildlife's going to be protected. It doesn't explain how they're going to help pedestrians move around. It doesn't explain about the environmental and the climate requirements of our policies. Those aren't optional. You know, the climate mitigation, the biodiversity net gain. We don't have those things just for a laugh. You know, they need to be shown how those things can be mitigated. So I just think, you know, the mix of the housing as well. 4-bedroom houses. We are desperate for smaller family homes. 3-bedroom homes for families. That's what we need. To have the mix so skewed in favour of the 4-bedroom, I think is a real mistake. So, you know, 2 big houses, no community input, no affordable homes. I think it works for the developer, but it doesn't work for us. So I'm happy to support Councillor Devon Davis and second that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Amy Tizzy. Councillor Julian Tizzy.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a real. I think the developers missed a trick here. It's interesting that I would have loved to have heard from a speaker. I would love to have heard like, well, look, here's why you should approve this. And it's quite interesting that they haven't engaged today. And it seems like it was a real mistake in not engaging with officers earlier, because I am predisposed towards approving reasonable applications. When I look at the map and you see that Coppermill Road has houses all the way, it's like a ribbon. It's one of those ribbon ones. It has all the way down except for that little gap, which is an allocated site. I mean, there's a lot that's going for this site, even though it is in Greenbelt, as you say. I actually was a bit confused actually, because I did see on the in the larger file that it looks like the Horton Parish Council have seen it. There's a thing from them from Horton Parish Council in November saying overall the parish councillors have no objections to this application, but they have a whole load of conditions that they suggest. So that they have seen it. So I wasn't sure about that. That wasn't going to be one of the reasons. I was thinking, well, hang on, no, I'm not buying that one. I think I was mistaken on the pedestrian crossing there. I think that it's a shame, because that road, there are these little humps, but they look very, very, very shallow. But there's definitely an opportunity there to, if you were to have housing on that side, to sort of just add a crossing or so, maybe. I personally like the idea of modern houses, but it does appear that they've sort of just gone a little bit too far and just decided, right, we're just going to do what we want to develop. And when I look at the housing mix, it's not even close. It's not even close to what we think. So I think, I would concur with what Councillor Buckley said earlier. This has been a very well put together summary. I thought that the summary of here's in favour and here's against, I really like that. And actually going forward, that's a good, I like that sort of balance, rather than bludgeoning us with one thing or the other, because there are always going to be balances. I concur. I don't think, I think we have to go with officer recommendations to refuse this.
Thank you, Councillor Mark Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to agree with most of what the recent speakers have said. I think I'd like to add the point about a pavement, in that seems to me a very, very serious omission. So basically, you're forcing anybody who visits these houses to use a car, including a postman, and all sorts of people. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to repeat the points, but there's clearly this site is ripe for a good development, and unfortunately, this isn't it. I mean, when I first saw the designs, I thought, oh, they're quite nice, quite modern, but then overlaying all the other features, it's like this doesn't really match up, unfortunately. So, yeah, inclined to agree with officers.
Nobody else? Sorry, Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I agree with everyone else. I think the fact that it's still in Greenbelt and doesn't have the affordable housing is for me the biggest thing on all of this. Although in some ways I quite like the idea that someone is ambitious enough to put such a high quality type development in an area like that. I think it would be quite interesting to see something like that come forward, so I can understand them kind of doing that. But I think it's probably just not quite right for where it is, and they needed to have provided some of the affordable housing that we need, and find a way of making the right contributions to S106, etc. So I think that just about tilts the balance for me.
I think what you were saying about engaging with local parish councils see every application, and they will meet and they'll comment on it. And there's a difference between comment on application and that engagement. And to me, one of the key things which we've kind of glossed over is there was a Horton and Wraysbury neighbourhood plan, which this doesn't fit in with. And we're always struggling to get the right amount of prominence for local neighbourhood plans. And I think that should be something to be considered with a bit more oomph, I believe. Do we have anybody else wishing to talk? Or are we ready to go for a vote on this? We have a proposer, Councillor Devon Davis, and the seconder, Councillor Amy Tizzy, to reject in accordance with the officer's recommendations laid out in paragraph 13, which are the full reasons at the bottom of the report. Name vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, we have a motion proposed by Councillor Davis and seconded by Councillor Amy Teasy to refuse planning permission for the reasons set out in section 13 of the report, which is per officer recommendation. I'll now do a named vote. Councillors are being asked to vote for refusal, against refusal, or abstain. Councillor Buckley.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Knowles.
For.
Councillor Luxton.
For.
Councillor Sharp.
For.
Councillor Amy Teasy.
For.
Councillor Julian Teasy.
For.
Councillor Wilson.
For.
Thank you. That's unanimous. The motion is carried.
Thank you very much indeed, Claire, for that really good presentation. We now move on to agenda item 5, which is a planning application, a full application for former Hurst Lodge School, Bagshot Road in Ascot. I suppose that will be Joe's presentation if you get lined up and as soon as you're ready. Just to anybody watching on Zoom, because of an early declaration, Councillor Luxon will be leaving the meeting.
Thank you.
Minute, you ready?
Thank you, Chair. So the second planning application tonight is the site address is former Hurst Lodge, and the proposal is for the erection of one detached dwelling with associated playing courts and landscaping following the demolition of the existing buildings. And just before I go into the presentation, I have a verbal update to give to members. And that is that since the publication of the committee report, we have received 4 letters of support from local residents. And I'll just outline what they've said in their letters of support. So really, they support one dwelling house on this site. It's considered that a more intensive development would impact woodland and wildlife and would increase traffic. A large house would be more in keeping with the surrounding character and density. There's a lack of services in the area, such as doctors, bus routes and schools. They feel the application preserves the openness of the green belt. Residents do not want to see an intensification in the use of the site, and that the site is not sustainable. So those really need to be considered alongside the other consultation comments and representations considered in the report. So to move on to the presentation. So this slide shows the location plan outlined in red and an aerial image of the site and surroundings. The site currently comprises a large vacant school building and associated structures. The site lies to the south of Ascot and very close to the boundary with Bracknell Forest Council. The borough boundary with Bracknell Forest is depicted by the purple line on the aerial photo. I think you can see that faintly across the left-hand side of the aerial photo. The site is predominantly surrounded by housing of mixed densities. It lies within the green belt and is heavily treed along the site boundaries. These photos show the existing school buildings set within substantial grounds and surrounded by mature trees. This slide shows a comparison of the existing and proposed site layout. The proposed dwelling would be sited in a similar location and orientation to the existing school buildings, with lawns to the front and rear, paddle courts to the rear, and the plans are showing to retain the existing outdoor swimming pool. I use my cursor. So it's basically to the right-hand side of the school building and the proposed dwelling. So this slide shows the front and rear elevations of the proposed dwelling house. The dwelling house is predominantly 2.5 stories and is of neoclassical Georgian style. It is a mansion house with 10 bedrooms and has an attached 1.5 story wing to the to the right-hand side there on the screen, with an 11-bay garage on the ground floor and staff accommodation above. This slide shows the two side elevations, or the west and east elevations of the dwelling house. Here is the proposed ground floor plan. So it contains multiple living areas, office, gym, indoor swimming pool, and the 11-bay garage. You can see the extent of the existing school building footprint is it's shown in the red dashed line. So it's a similar footprint to the proposed dwelling. This slide shows the proposed first floor plan. So that's got 10 ensuite bedrooms and the staff accommodation over the garage wing. And there is a terrace area, first floor terrace area, proposed to the northeast of the building. And that's closest to the boundary with Meridian Court, which is heavily screened with trees. This is the second floor accommodation, which includes some ancillary recreational spaces such as a bowling alley and theatre. This slide shows the proposed landscaping of the site. The development has been designed suitably and in terms of its location to ensure no harm to trees, and has been subject to consultation with the tree officer. So as stated earlier, 2 paddle courts are proposed within the rear garden to serve future occupants, and this slide shows the plans and elevations of the courts. Also, as stated earlier, the site lies within the green belt. Paragraph 154 of the NPPF sets out the exceptions to inappropriate development within the green belt, one of which is the redevelopment of previously developed land, which would not cause substantial harm to the openness of the green belt. As can be seen from these volume comparisons, the proposed dwelling house would have a similar spread and siting as the existing buildings, albeit it would be larger in mass and bulk. So the existing is the top image there, and the proposed is below. The volume uplift is approximately 30%, which officers do not consider to be substantially harmful to openness. Thus, we believe the exception of paragraph 154G of the NPPF is met, and the proposal constitutes appropriate development in the green belt. This slide shows a visualization of the front elevation of the dwelling with formal landscape gardens. And then the next few slides I'll run through will show some photos taken by the case officer of the site and surroundings. So on the left there you've got Bagshot Road, which the site is accessed off, showing the mature screening along both sides of the road. On the right there you've got the view of the building in the background from the site entrance. Here are some more photos. So the front of the existing buildings on the left-hand side, and then that's the sort of front side elevation as you get to the existing building from the driveway. These photos are of the rear view of the existing building. The view of the western elevation of the school buildings on the left there, and then on the right you've got the tree-lined driveway. which accesses the site. So I've just set out some primary considerations here, for an application of this nature. Firstly, the loss of the vacant school building is an important consideration. Is considered acceptable in this instance when assessed against policy IF6. The private school, which formerly resided here, was located to an alternative site in 2018, and the building has since been vacant. So throughout the course of the application, we have consulted with the Children's Services Department, who have confirmed that there's no educational need for the site. Then, obviously, another important consideration, the site comprises previously developed land in the Greenbelt. The quantum of development proposed would not result in substantial harm to the Greenbelt when compared with the existing development. The proposal is therefore appropriate development in the Greenbelt under paragraph 154G of the NPPF. So in terms of housing, the NPPF requires planning authorities to significantly boost the supply of homes. The overall aim should be to meet an area's identified housing need, including an appropriate mix of housing types for the local community. And that's outlined in paragraph 61 of the framework. As we've already heard tonight, and you're fully aware, the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. The current supply is at 4.47 years, which equates to a shortfall of 642 homes. Paragraph 130 of the NPPF states that where there is an existing shortage of land for meeting identified housing need, it is especially important that decisions avoid homes being built at low densities and ensure that developments make optimal use of the potential of each site. In these circumstances, local planning authorities should refuse applications which they consider fail to make an efficient use of land. So in terms of the other key policy considerations, no policy conflicts have been identified in relation to impact on neighbouring amenity, impact on the character of the area, trees, highways, or flood risk. However, the application fails to provide ecology surveys to demonstrate the presence or otherwise of bats, and that's within the school building and two outbuildings on the site. Furthermore, in the absence of a Section 106 legal agreement, the proposal fails to provide mitigation to the Thames Basin Heath SPA, fails to provide a policy-compliant affordable housing contribution, fails to secure significant on-site B&G, which has been proposed, and fails to secure a carbon offset contribution. Whilst such matters could in time be resolved through the legal agreement process, such measures are not in place at the time of determining the application, and without such measures, the proposal conflicts with the relevant development plan policies. In terms of the planning balance, the council is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and as such, decision-making should be carried out in accordance with paragraph 11D of the framework. In this case, paragraph 11D1 is triggered as the absence of a legal agreement to secure mitigation to the Thames Basin Heath SPA provides a strong reason for refusing development. The tilted balance is therefore not engaged in this instance. Weighing in favour of the scheme is the provision of one dwelling house and the short-term economic benefits from the construction and operational period. Weighing against the scheme is that the provision of only one dwelling would not be an efficient use of land and should be refused in line with paragraph 130 of the NPPF at a time when the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply and the shortfall is some 642 homes. The absence of further survey work to rule out the presence of bats and failure to secure a legal agreement to secure affordable housing, a carbon offset contribution, B&G, and mitigation towards the SPA. So to conclude, officers consider that there are strong and clear reasons to refuse the development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you indeed. We have a speaker now from the applicants, Mandeep Malhotra. If you can take your position. The microphone there has a button at the bottom of it. So if you press it now, so we can test you're here. We have 3 minutes to speak from when you start talking, and Kim will give you a 1 minute warning that you're coming to an end of your time. So as soon as you're ready, off we go.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Mandip Malhotra and I'm the Head of Planning at the Aurora Group. I'm here today to speak in support of the planning application. This is an unallocated windfall greenbelt site, which before being converted to a school in approximately 1945 was itself a single family dwelling home. This scheme is effectively taking the site back to its original form. There are two main reasons for refusal, the underdevelopment of the site, and secondly, the need for a VAT survey. Joe has mentioned that there are 4 other reasons for refusal. However, they would fall away because we have agreed to all of them. We have agreed to 10% biodiversity net gain, £84,000 legal contributions towards carbon offset, £26,000 towards the affordable housing, commuted sum, £1,500 for the SANG, and £3,000 for highways improvements. So we have agreed those, or agreed to complete a legal agreement for them. Turning to the main reason for refusal, this proposal has been through a number of rounds of pre-application advice, and I note that they're not in the officer report, by not just us, but also other parties, for schemes which at the time were deemed to be viable of circa 50 units, and I believe somewhere around the region of 100 units. Crucially, the advice to redevelop this site, which cost us thousands of pounds, was overwhelmingly negative. I just want to read a few excerpts from this pre-app advice. The current development is overdevelopment, being excessive in volume, scale, and layout. The current arrangement is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. The provision of housing would not outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt. We took on board all of that advice from the officers. We went to see various parish councils. We met with local residents, some of whom are here this evening to support our concerns.
1 minute remaining.
And we came up with a scheme that we thought was appropriate development because it does not have a mass. It is confined to the built-up form. Bats could be overcome by virtue of a Grampian condition. This is not a sustainable site. Your own officer report does say that this is not a sustainable site. So I would ask, when making your decision this evening, please ask yourself if you agree with the planning officers that this is not a suitable location for an intensive development and is unsustainable. We must put appropriate development in sustainable locations, and you have allocations, a bit like the item before us. I would ask that you, at the very least, remove reason for refusal 1 from the officer recommendation, if not overturn the recommendation that's before you today. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
No questions, sorry, sir. Thank you very much. We now move on to the examination phase. Questions to officers about the application. Councillor Beckley.
Yes, I'm just taking on board what the lady said there as well, and I've just done a quick search or in the background. I understand the original dwelling as a single dwelling was built in 1580, 445 years ago, which has been a single dwelling. It was converted to a school in 1945 and has been a single property for 80 years since. There hasn't been a reason, and maybe because it's a school and maybe that's the reason it's come up to panel. Could I get an explanation why it's come forward to panel, just so I understand exactly the reasons, if that's fair?
Joe, could you explain?
It's a major application because of the floor area. So even though it's one dwelling, yeah, it's a major development.
Thank you. I would just like to explore a couple of things that were raised by the speaker. And in the report, it says about not being able to secure the Section 106 agreement and all of these things. And then the speaker mentioned that they were willing to to do those. Could you just go into a little bit more detail about why that hasn't been agreed before this point, and why is it the case that we cannot just take their word now that they would agree to those things at this point? Thank you.
So I think if officers would support the principle of development of this particular development on this site, we would be engaging with the applicants, asking them to work with us on the heads of terms of legal agreement, instructing our legal team. We are very concerned with the principle of the development, where we are at the moment in terms of the need to provide housing, the lack of a 5-year housing land supply means that we have very strong reasons to be refusing the principle of development in this case. So we have not instructed our legal team. Likewise, the applicant has not submitted a draft legal agreement, have not encouraged us to do so. So it comes to the point when we need to make a decision on a planning application, we have to do so based on what we have in front of us. What we have in front of us, it is a scheme that doesn't have those policy matters, technical matters, if you like, all wrapped up and secured in a legal agreement.
Okay, so that's fine, that makes sense. So there's just no point even considering that, because actually the main thing about only providing the one dwelling is too great to overcome. And then just to go back to this point about previous pre-application advice, and that the principle of, say, 50 or 100 units on the site was considered to be overdevelopment. Presumably that means that somewhere between 1 and 50 and 100 could be appropriate development of the site.
So before I answer that question, I would have to set out that the pre-app advice that was given was before the update to the NPPF. So it was in a very different planning policy climate, if you like. It was when we didn't have to look at the tilted balance. Another thing that changed in the NPPF was that paragraph 145G was made more lenient, if you like. So greenbelt sites, previously developed greenbelt sites, they can be redeveloped in such a way that as long as there's not substantial harm to the openness, it's appropriate. But before that, so when we engaged with the applicant on the pre-application advice, the relevant exception in paragraph 154 was that you could have no greater harm. So you'd be looking at a similar quantum of development. So under the new NPPF, you could have a greater quantum of development on a previously developed site, and we really need to supply housing. So the advice that was given, and I don't have the exact figure in terms of housing numbers, it was a much greater housing number, it was an overdevelopment, but it was in a completely different context. But going back to your question, yes, we'd be looking for somewhere in between.
Thank you, that makes sense. So we're working with different rules of the game essentially now. Thank you.
Councillor Julian Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned policy earlier on, and I just noticed in the list of consultees you had Sunningdale Parish Council, but you didn't have Sunninghill Parish Council, and this Hurst Lodge is in Sunninghill, not in Sunningdale. So I'm not sure that you've been through the consultee process correctly.
So that would be an automatic consult. I'm just going to double check the system just to make sure it's not an error in the officer report.
That's the side of the road where Hurst Lodge is in Sunninghill. The other side of the road is Sunningdale. So it seems to me that you've gone to the wrong parish council.
So I'm just going to check the parish council comments just to make sure it's not an error in the report.
Don't worry, I won't fill the gap with the joke. We'll see. Okay, so that's it.
I happen to know that the applicant went to Sunning Hill Parish Council to do some consultation with them prior to putting in this application.
I think it's something maybe we can.
Well,
It's an important point, but maybe
it's actually a very important point, because if it's incorrect.
Can we move on and somebody else look at that, and maybe Joe carry on with the meeting at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, what I can say is we've got Sunningdale parish comments on the system. So that's what we've got. Claire's just going to double check the parish council boundaries for me.
So we have they been? Can we revisit that? Come back when Claire's had a look and found out a definitive answer. I think.
Yes, I've got a few other questions as well.
Yeah, I know. But there's a very good interactive map they have, which shows you what's been raised.
So the map I'm looking at, there's the borough boundary between Sunningdale and Sunning Hill. Bagshot Road runs like that, and there is a small gap on the northwest side of Bagshot Road that is still within Sunningdale Parish. So it's an automated process, so I would be surprised if we got it wrong. But I'm just going to, what we carry on, we'll try and get a more zoomed in version of this map for you.
I think the character of the area is an important point, and this new house seems like quite a big one. I'll admit that, but there are other houses in that road of a similar type and size and shape, so it wouldn't be out of keeping in the area at all. And in fact, if you were to put a housing estate of 50 or 60 houses of that type, that would be totally out of keeping with the area, that road, and it's probably very unsustainable as well, because there is no public transport down that road. There is no, wouldn't be easy to walk from there. You walk through an area with no pavement and all of that sort of thing, and it's a fast road. So you would definitely be putting people at risk if you were to build along that road in that way for a lot of houses, in 50 or 60 houses or whatever the number is that you might be proposing there. So there would be a lot of changes necessary to the whole character of that area. So I think that's an important point to bear in mind. And given that this is really only building on essentially the same footprint as the school is, which is set well back, you don't really see it or notice it as you're driving past, particularly. Or so it's a setting which actually favours this sort of development, and it wouldn't favour 50 or 60 houses on that particular road. So actually, I think it looks like quite an interesting application.
Is there any more questions? We're trying to keep questions to this part, and then later.
So I'd like to understand. We've got a site which is suitable for this sort of application. Why would it not be suitable from a planning point of view?
Joe, if you can answer that.
Yeah, so I'll pick up on your comments about the types of housing in the area and the density. And I don't know if I should share my screen again, actually. So I think this is a good slide, because so the application site here shows one very large building. To the north, I think this is Meridian Court. So these are sort of terrace bungalows, so much higher density.
Yeah, they are.
Here, I think it's Early Wood or Early Dean. sort of a courtyard development of
That's on the other
of
side of the
dwellings.
road.
Yeah, it's just in terms of surrounding, and then the other side of Bagshot Road. So we have got detached dwellings here. See, the plot sizes are much smaller than the application site. So I'm trying to say there's a mix. There's a mix in terms of character. There's not a policy objection in terms of character. There's a really strong policy concern about the inefficient use of land. So that's in this context of where we need to determine applications, in the context of the lack of the 5-year housing land supply.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I guess, thinking about this, there's a bit of a dilemma in my mind. So we're saying, just thinking, I guess, the numbers. So we're saying that like maybe 50, I guess it was excessive. It may or may not be excessive now. 1 is too few, but then the 1 is actually a 10-bed. So the proposal is for 10 bedrooms and then 11 car port. So this isn't really one person.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, I know we have in the plans, we have these sort of plans for like 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, 4 bed houses. Does that actually extend to 10 beds? Do we actually have is there a requirement? Everybody's laughing, but it's like this is clearly a proposal. Somebody wants to build this. Is there actually a covered need in the plan for this sort of size of house? Because for me, there could be 20 people living here. And if
This isn't somebody building it on a speculative basis, they're building it for themselves, aren't they?
Well, I don't know, but there could be, I don't know, it could be a large family or whatever. There could be a decent number of people here living here. It might not be 1 or 2 people, it could be a lot of people. It could be freeing up 5 or 6 other houses and staff and everything. So looking at the numbers, is there I'm not quite sure what the question is now.
No, I think I know.
Is there a number criteria where this can actually go? This is meeting something.
Yeah, it's policy H02, housing types and sizes, and there's that's based on some evidence documents looking at sort of housing need, and I think it splits it out into 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, and Louise or Claire might correct me if I'm wrong, and then 4+.
Yes.
So it doesn't go all the way up to 10. It just has a category for larger family homes, if you like, which is, I suppose this would fall under. But it would still constitute 1 dwelling house for the purposes of our housing numbers.
Councillor Julian,
thank you, Chair. So just a few questions. Going back to the other objections, I think 106. I think that question's been covered. It sounds like that's not the all and end all. It sounds like, especially if it's been agreed in principle. But can I ask about the bats? The applicant or the speaker talked about potentially. I think I've got it a Grampian condition. And I don't know if that's it. Well, I tried to. That's not something I'd heard of. It looks like it's to do with Scottish law, but it does appear it was mentioned. Is that something? Is that something that you recognise and can it be explained away? I mean, I know that certainly in our ward we've had the requirements over bats are rather onerous, I think, and that's just the rules that they are. Especially because certain things can only be checked at certain times in the year, and it's cost and time is what it takes. But let's just deal with that question first.
Could you check, or Louise?
Yeah. Okay. Grampian conditions aren't used very much anymore. They're not good practice, really. But effectively, what they are is negatively worded conditions. So, for example, thinking of an example I've had previously, there was an issue around ownership of a road, who owned an access road, and we were having problems finding it. And at that time, we put a Grampian on saying you can't commence development until somebody identifies who owns the road and you get the permission from who owns the road. It's not good practice to do that. You need certainty when you're putting conditions and securing through 106. So we tend not to use them really at all, very, very infrequently nowadays. I'm not saying they can't be done. I'm just saying it's just not a tidy way to secure an unknown.
So just to finish off on the bats thing, is there more that can or needs to be done there? Yeah, let's give it that one.
Yeah, I'll answer that one. So yeah, we would never use a condition to request more surveys. So so a lot of sites require sort of initial bat surveys, preliminary surveys. They've done that in this case, and what's been concluded from that initial survey is that the site has potential for bats. So then you need further surveys to rule that out or confirm that, if you like. So but the potential in this case is very high. So the school building itself, so that was assessed as having a high potential for roosting bats, as well as a confirmed bat roost. And then there were two other outbuildings. One was low potential and one was high potential. I would say, looking at all that, this is a case where we really need those emergent surveys to be done prior to favourable decision on the application. It's a high potential for bats, and there is a bat roost.
Okay, is that going to be a red flag to any development really, or is it something that can be, okay, if we build it this way, or if we keep this bit of the building where the bat roost is? I mean, assume I know nothing here. It just it does seem to be an absolute minefield. Bats, it really does. It seems to be almost like a red flag, possibly, to developing any old building. Is that fair?
So the certainty is that they need these additional surveys. It could be that whatever the survey reveals in terms of a bat roost, they could overcome that issue through, well, we call it the derogation test. There's certain tests the decision maker would need to carry out when a bat roost needs to be moved, essentially. We would consult with our ecologists. They would need a licence from Natural England. We'd also need to consider, I suppose, the benefits of the development. Could an alternative development take place? So that comes down to, I suppose, other policy matters and what the specifics of the application is. I would say under most cases, you could overcome it, but there's a series of survey work and tests that need to be carried out to get to that point.
Okay, so it sounds like almost quite surprising that this hasn't been done, given the significance, the enormity of this application. It's okay, so that still does remain, by the sounds of it. Okay, one question on the main thing about the density, which I know others have asked about. So, am I right in thinking that we're sort of the new NPPF, which introduced the tilted balance, also introduced other things? I heard that essentially this the redevelopment of a previous dwelling, it's a bit looser than it used to be. I remember there was something that came to panel a couple of years ago about this big hotel that had a few extra buildings, and then it was immediately no because it was a little bit bigger. And potentially now, if that were to come under the new rules, maybe actually that would have been, well, let's not redo that one. But the rules, it seems, have got looser on that. On the other hand, you've got this rule about the density, and you can't approve low density things. Can I ask again for your opinion? I know that something between 1 and 50 would be an appropriate development in that area, but not 1. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's fair. I mean, if it helps you sort of quantify it, The dwelling proposed has an external floor area of approximately 4,100 square metres, has an internal floor area of 3,765 square metres. The standard size of a 3-bed home in the UK is 88 square metres. So, you know, just looking at the quantum of development proposed in this application in the one building, whether that's would to remain as one building or be broken up into housing and some houses, some flats, there's a lot that can be done on this site in terms of the quantum of development, given the changes to paragraph 154 and the impact on the greenbelt and the need to provide housing.
And that's a quick one. I've still the last question as well. What puzzled me is if we were, it's going away in a bit of a drift, but if this wasn't approved and somebody came back with approval to put 250 houses on this site, that would probably not be approved as an inappropriate development on a greenbelt. So this seems to me to be a complete paradox, the whole thing, you know, because if somebody came in and said, we're going to drop 400 houses here, 200 houses here to make up the housing need, then it probably wouldn't get over the bar for an appropriate development of the greenbelt, even with the new rules, would it? It wouldn't really.
That's what planning is all about, is getting the balance right. So it's about meeting that one and meeting that one. It's the balance, and that's what we're looking at now. So we're balancing it out. Does it meet the policies? Does it meet the range of policies? So yeah, I hear what you say. But I think we probably would say no, they came in 300 or 400 units.
No, I'm just saying, if somebody was then to pivot and come in with someone else, it would be an awful catch-22, you know, situation. You can't do one thing, you can't do the other. If you did the other thing, the local residents and neighbours would be up in arms, you know. So it's a really difficult thing to see why that can override. I also have this thing with the 5-year housing balance. I seem to have counted up recently, committees I've been involved in have approved over 2,000 houses so far in the last year. And these things are never counted towards this 5-year housing need. And that is, I think, what people can't understand when people watch it. They say, hang on, we did that thing down there and he did that there. And that number stays at 4.97 forever. I think really, you know, there needs to be a shift on how these things are assessed as well, because this is an unusual thing, isn't it? Because normally we are forced to approve things because of the 5-year housing supply. And this time, it's the other way around. So it's quite remarkably odd, isn't it? So that whole point was, I think most people, you know, observing don't understand why we've always got this stuck 5-year housing supply when we're approving building on every square inch available, you know, or approving the build. So it's an issue. I don't know if there's any point where that gets adjusted or can be taken into account in future.
I think I'm following you there, but just, I mean, the 5-year housing land supply has been around for quite a while. I think the difference is that whereas in the NPPF in 2023, they said we have to try and meet it, the new NPPF in 2024 says we have to, and here's a bit more. So it has upped the odds on it, and it has adjusted the NPPF to ensure that we're making best use of land, that we're maximising our, you know, consents for new dwellings, basically. And in terms of the 5-year supply, and our sites have come forward, our allocation sites have come forward, not as quickly as we'd like, but they are coming forward. But notwithstanding that, the plan is now, it is now 3 years old, the sites are coming forward. We're starting to need to look, now our housing target has nearly doubled. We're now starting to have to look for housing wherever the sites present, really, including windfalls. So that's the position we're in at the moment. And if anything, 4.47 years against the 5-year supply is likely to go down over the next year onwards, I would say. It won't go up, it'll go down. So we're not in the unfortunate position where I've been previously, where we've only got 2 and a bit years, but it's not 5 years. So automatically we go into tilted balances where it applies.
Thank you very much. Sorry for being question.
Okay, it's
There you go.
frustrating.
Challenge is what it's all about. Councillor Amy, is it?
It was only a quick point, Chair, and Amy's allowed me to, Mr. Councillor Tizzy's asked me to go first, but very quickly. I've just got a number of points, probably 6 or 7. I don't want to hit them now. I'm happy to forego.
Break them up a bit.
Yeah, so I just wanted to raise it because I don't want them being missed before. Thank you.
Actually, I think my point's probably been answered. I was just going to go back to the fact that even though, so the applicant's representative was saying that, you know, previously 50, 100 houses were thrown out as being inappropriate, but actually we can't look at that as reason to say this is okay, because the NPPF has changed, the requirements have changed, and what was okay then may not be okay now, or vice versa. So we're starting afresh, essentially. Yeah.
Do it, Sam.
Joe, do you want to? Yeah, I think that's correct. And I think, yes, maybe, you know, 100 units would be too much for this site, given the sensitivities and its location in the Greenbelt. But there is, as Joe mentioned, 1 to 50, maybe 25, or, you know, 15 or 30, you know, it's something in there, given the floor area and the sheer space it's taking up already, it's working, you know. If you're using that average UK 3-bedroom house size of 88 square metres, you know, it's about sort of looking at the options for the site and what it could reasonably deliver given its constraints, and it would definitely be more than one dwelling.
Are you ready to go, Councillor Buckland? It was next.
I think I'll probably come in on the main point, which is the inefficient use of land, HO2, and the best use of land, and could an alternative development take place? I'd probably like to deal with that issue. Can I just ask a couple of questions? The property's been empty since 2018. I understand it used to be a private school. Since that, which is 7 years, has any applications come forward from private developers to develop this land?
Jim, if you're ready for that one.
We haven't had any formal planning applications for housing development at the site.
Okay, thank you. And so I'm just dealing with this efficient use of land, because it's all right having this land sitting there, but we've got to make use of it. And it just doesn't work for developers. You know, at the moment, development, you can have 1 million houses, and this is what the government's struggling with. So I think Councillor Knowles was very, very prudent to bring up his points where there's this conflict. But I really, really want to bring in this efficient use of land, because if we'd had applications, or we have an ideal, yeah, 250 houses, 50 houses, but someone's got to build them, someone's got to come forward with it, and you've got to have the land available. Now that means landowners giving up that land and making it available. Now, sometimes people don't do that. Sometimes they want to hang on to that land and they want to develop it how they want and where they see fit. And I think there's a number of points here. You know, we're talking about I think Councillor Wilson mentioned about 10 bedrooms. I don't think it was a laughable matter. I think we have to look at properties this size, and people with this level of wealth coming into our area create huge benefits for the local areas, both in employment. It is a business. It's not a property. This is a business. This is like a £100 million company coming into your area. It's not to be sniffed at. And, you know, when you talk about best use of land, you know, I would query that this is the best use of land. You know, for 445 years, it's had a single dwelling on that property. There's no exception that this property would take a huge amount of maintenance to mature trees, all the established trees that are there now to maintain that, which this development does. And, you know, there's so many positives that I see with this, and it seems to be a bit discriminatory against wealth. And I really don't like that feeling. I'm feeling that you know, we need to look at the positives that it brings in. It is the best use of land for this particular case, because you haven't had any other options. Now, in the next 7 years, there'll be even less options with inflation and the costs of building. And we can have all these MPFs and all these different policies, but you've got to get people to build. And there hasn't been any other applications on this site whatsoever. And I don't think there will be. And I don't think the landowner's going to let the land go, no matter what, to build 50 or 200 houses on. So we have to get real here, and we have to look at the situation and say, what are the real negatives here? And it certainly isn't best use of land and efficient use of land. This is the appropriate use of this land, in my opinion.
We're not in the debate part yet. We're in the question part.
Oh,
But don't worry.
policy.
Don't worry. You wanted it for a second. And we're now to, was it yourself? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of step back a little bit and pick up a point. So firstly, this is an unallocated site, isn't it? So this was never considered in the BLP.
No, it's not an allocated site because it wouldn't have come forward in core sites. Because of timing and everything.
Yeah, okay. So
I was just going to respond quickly to Councillor Buckley's comment, if that's okay, which is we can't ignore the fact that our planning decisions need to be made in accordance with the policies both at national and local levels, which is what's cited in the report. So I just want to pull you back to that. I can hear what you say about common sense and development, but we have had pre-application inquiries into the site. There has been interest in developing the site. If the owner decides not to sell, we cannot control that. But the site is, we still have to apply the policies, and members, I'm afraid you still need to give them consideration in coming to your decision. Oh, Joe just wants to add something, if that's okay.
And you had a question, didn't you?
Yeah, I'll pick it up in a minute.
Yeah, if you want to just say.
Just to follow on from what Louise was saying, and in response to Councillor Buckley, yes, the site has been vacant for 6 years now, and nothing has come forward then. But the MPPF has only just changed, and so I think developers, landowners, they know that we've got a 5-year housing land supply shortage. They know that the changes. They know the changes to Greenbelt policy. There is opportunities to explore development on this site. And since the change to the MPPF, we haven't had those come forward. So I don't think we can really be thinking about it for over the last 6 years. It's more sort of what could a developer do now, and it's a lot more than they could do.
Yeah,
Carry
I take on board the officer's points, and in regards to that, but the situation is it's sorry, I'll come back, Chair. Sorry, I apologise.
We are now to Councillor Wilson again.
Thank you. So considering, I guess, the site, if it went through a BLP process, is there a kind of like a number of dwellings that would be a target? Because obviously the first item we looked at this evening had 24 in the BLP, which is quite a specific number, and then they came forward with 26, and the number wasn't the issue; it was the mix and the design and everything, and the pound numbers. And I'm almost thinking, if again doing the maths of the square meterage and everything, if there was like 15 to 20 dwellings come forward, would that be more like what a BLP would kind of go? Oh yeah, this site. As in, if a plan looked at this site, it would completely discount the single dwelling house, even though that was there in the history.
The fact that it used to be a single dwelling house, in effect, is neither here nor there, because its last use was as a private school. It's used for educational purposes. So that's the material aspect, not the history necessarily. And they're not, and looking at when a site comes forward and you're looking at the allocation process, there is a whole exercise that our policy colleagues will follow to do with assessing the constraints of the site, looking at, reasonable densities for the site, looking at other factors that are all relevant to that particular site, including viability, and then they'll work through and they'll come up with a developable figure. So this is a windfall site, it's not an allocation. As you referred to the earlier site, that exercise would have been followed, which is where the number 24 came up. So it was taking all those factors into account, really.
Do we have more questions?
I have a few, but I'll just come back on those two. Apologies for stumbling earlier. Just to Officer Richards, really, in terms of the housing supply, yes, but there are also lots of other sites around the borough which will become available. And if we look at that now under the current new MPFF, the situation is that we have lots of other sites, and with the council's financial position, that developers will look at that are far more suitable than that site, and destroying all that green belt and all of the green trees and mature trees. And as Councillor Noel says, really, it really is a situation whereby yes, we are looking at things new, but that works both ways as well. You know, we need to look at what's the proper places for this, and do we want to destroy all that area and all that green belt with loads of houses, or are there better places in the borough to hit our housing target? And to Officer Reid, just basically, to me, you were saying about balance earlier, and you're making these statements, and I think it's a great way to look at it. This is why we need to balance this up, and I think interpretation is important. It's how we interpret, and what I was trying to put across was we can interpret better use of land in efficient use of land in different ways, and to fit policy or not to fit policy. So it's just my argument in regards to those items. I would interpret it slightly differently in my instance to what you're interpreting. That's what point I was trying to make. Thank you.
If you don't feel it's an answerable question, then
We
we
can. I think there's two separate things. One is, yes, I think so. Yeah, we know we've got all that allocations in the borough local plan, and as Louise has said, they're starting to come forward. They're coming forward slowly. But even if we take all of them into account, they're not going to meet the housing numbers that we need to provide. So the local plan, again, as Louise said, sets out that we need to provide so much housing. The NPPF now requires us to provide even more, and I think it's a rolling supply of homes that we need to provide. I think the figure's going to go up every year, so it's a constant need. And I think I do really understand the point you're making about not wanting to destroy the greenbelt. This is a greenbelt site, but because we can't meet our 5-year housing land supply and we need to provide even more homes as a result of the updates to the NPPF, we are going to have to start looking at, under the local plan review, we're going to have to start looking at greenbelt sites. So the NPPF is more lenient now in terms of what can take place in the greenbelt. They've introduced grey belts, so developers will be coming forward and speculating in terms of where they can build homes. This is a previously developed site, so I would say it's probably more suitable than a greenfield grey belt site that might come forward. And if we don't maximise development on sites like this, we'll have to agree to housing, or we'll find it more difficult to refuse housing on those non-previously developed sites in the greenbelt because of the new rules in the NPPF. Louise, do you want to say anything more?
I was just going to add, I think when I talked earlier about balance and getting schemes right, should anything come forward on this site in the future, then the fact that it has a lot of trees, the fact that it's in the greenbelt would still be material. So we'd be looking for a scheme that respected those trees, retained them, kept the openness of the greenbelt in place. So it may well be that if they were to convert the building or to demolish the buildings, it's quite a large area, and it might be contained to that area, and keep the rest of the open space. So when I said it's a mixture of different policies that you're having to weigh up when you're looking at the planning balance, it's those things that I was talking about. But I don't think there's any dispute in the fact that the floor area of the existing building, the gross external floor area of the existing buildings, because there's several of them, is pretty big, and it lends itself to more dwellings than we currently see before us. So that's really where I was coming into it. It's not about taking down everything on the site and build up to the fringes. It's not that at all. You weigh up all the different policies and get that balance in there. But what we are required to do is to look at the policies about maximising the development on the site for residential within the other constraints.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things based on things that Councillor Buckley said. number one, we can't possibly say whether there are sites available for housing until we do a proper call for sites as part of the BLP process. So we can't speculate about that, right? Councillor Buckley talked about, well, this is a business. This is, and I think I think he meant somebody who owns this big house would bring something economically to the area. But just so there's no confusion, this is not being brought to us as a hotel, as any sort of business in its right. It says nowhere in the report that this is a business. He was presumably implying that somebody very wealthy having this kind of house would bring some economic benefit to the town. But that's not what the report says.
That's right. There's no evidence of that. It's proposed as a single dwelling house.
I don't think they do their own vacuum in there. I don't think they do their own house cleaning vacuum. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. Just following on from what Councillor Teasey was saying there, we've also got no guarantee at all that this site will come forward for any other usage at all as part of any process that we might put in place to build houses in the borough. You know, it is owned by someone who has bought it as a site, but we've got no guarantee that they would propose it for multiple housing in any way, shape or form. So we're putting things into our own minds which actually don't exist, unless one of the planning team is going to tell me that you've actually got an application in for 25 or 30 or 40 houses or whatever on that site if this is refused. And I don't think that's the case at all.
I would just ask to refer to Katrina, as the legal counsel tonight. Katrina?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, let me just switch my camera on. Good evening, members. I just want to jump in at this point, if you can hear me, just to pick up on this, the debate around what may or may not happen, or what might come forward on this site, and kind of point that there's no guarantee that this site would be sold off to any other developer. That is not a planning consideration. Members have, and it's I can understand why members are speculating because of the discussion around density and numbers and efficient use of land. But you mustn't fetter the discretion of the local planning authority to determine any future application or speculate about what that might look like in the Greenbelt and the impact on the environment and everything else. I just wanted to try and bring that debate back to the application that's before you, but in the policy context around all of the discussion on more efficient and effective use of land. So, I mean, it does inevitably invite a debate about what might happen in the future, but the fact that this is a privately owned site and that this is an application from the family of that site, and members might think, well, nobody else is going to develop on this site. That's not to say that you're weighing up that this application should be granted because nothing else is going to happen and it's just going to sit there as a derelict school, and that's not a good look, is it? I don't think that's the correct planning consideration or the planning balance to weigh up, bearing in mind the officer's report that's before you and all that's been said about Joe and Louise about the new MPPF, the timing of that, and the absolute requirement, the critical requirement for housing numbers, and the stronger than ever presumption in favour of development. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future with this site, but you do have a live application before you that you must determine on the planning merits that pertain as of now. I hope that's helpful. I just wanted to make those points. Thank you.
Councillor Sharp?
Thank you, Chair. I think this whole debate about what if is totally spurious. We've got the application in front of us for a single house, which actually fits the character and nature of the area.
And I think
and-
at this point, does everybody agree we've asked the questions to death because
Yeah.
we're wandering off into what ifs, aren't we, rather than facts? If we've got a factual question.
I've got a natural question for Katerina, actually, in law, and just asking the officer's report. Obviously, when we're talking about inefficient use of land and best use of land, would that not come under the same clarification that she just said about what ifs and whatever? Or, you know, this is the point of law, you know, where
Is that, Katrina, a definition of under planning law for the best use of land?
Well, it's the policy. It's the policies in your local plan and the new NPPF. Sorry. It's the policies that you have in your local plan at the NPPF. So, Councillor Buckley, I'm not sure if I understood your question exactly correctly.
It was really that definition of appropriate use, the appropriate use, efficient use of land.
Yes. And this is where the officer's report addresses that, and the officers have answered those questions about the likelihood of a more an application coming forward. But the member debate was talking about some of a suggestion that there might be a blanket coverage of that entire site. But I think Louise explained the point about those any future planning application coming forward and would be determined and be subject to due process for any alternative site. I was just alternative scheme. I beg your pardon. I was just making the point that there could be more effective uses of that site, but you can't fetter the discretion of the local planning authority. They need to determine those applications on the basis of the policy pertaining at the time. I don't know if that helps, Joel. I'm not trying to confuse matters, but
I think the better point, isn't it, is that we're supposed to view what's in front of us as an application. I think that's really where the drift of this is going. Yet there's a whooping great thing in there saying that it'd be more appropriate to build more houses there, but that's not actually the application. It's not even there. It's not even, as a part of the application. So I think generally, what I'm getting the feeling is people are a bit uncomfortable that sits there and it's not anything that's considered as part of the plan, is it? As an option.
Chair, please, can you not speak for us all, because I don't feel uncomfortable with that. I think it makes perfect sense according to our policy that we need to build more houses, and it's saying that this doesn't build enough, this application doesn't add enough houses. That doesn't seem confusing to me. It's not spurious.
The application isn't to build more houses.
Yeah.
No, that's the point.
That is the point, and we're drilled into it, that we can only consider what's in front of us at any one time. Yeah.
Yes, we can only consider what's in front of us at the current time. This is an application for a single dwelling, but we also have to, and we're required to, consider it against the policies both at national and local level. And the policies at national and local level say this is not efficient use of land for residential development. So yes, but the legislation directs the decision maker to the development plan, which is our borough local plan. And since that policy, since that legislation came in place, we also have the NPPF. So we also have to give due regard to the policies there, which have changed since December 2024. I hope that explains things a bit.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I guess I'm just trying to sort of boil this down to what are the key things, and it seems to me that the first reason for a refusal is the key one, and that it is basically the inefficient use of land. So there's a lot of things that are fine about this, the footprint, the green belt, and all the rest of it, but actually the fact that it's 1,000 square meters for one dwelling house, that is the. Sorry. Oh, big one. That was even worse. Okay, fine. Sorry, it's over 1,000. That's why it's here. Yes, 3,700 for one dwelling house is that is basically the reason for rejection, because that does not fit the planning policy, because it's an inefficient use of space.
Given that we don't have, sorry, let me put the microphone on. Given that we don't have a full 5-year housing land supply, we are obliged to, and alongside that, we have policies telling us to make best use of land. And best use of land is to ensure that we get the maximum number of units out of that site. Whatever the future might be for this site, it would be inappropriate for us to it would be wrong, really, not appropriate for us not to take those policies into account, given the circumstances. So, yeah, basically, this is not making best use of the site, and therefore it's not complying with the policy, either at national or local level.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned in what you just said, like, because we don't have a 5-year housing land supply. If we did, how much would that change this?
It would shift the weighting somewhat, but it wouldn't preclude the fact that the best use of land policy is there regardless, both in the NPPF and in our local plan. So it would still present difficulties. It would add a little bit of weighting. It would drop the need weighting somewhat, but the need weighting, because we haven't got the 5-year supply, is very high. So therein lies the challenges really here.
Councillor Julian Shaw.
So I think I really need to understand, because you've been talking incessantly about not making appropriate use of land. So if a development came along on this site or any other site, and there were, take this site for example, and there were 2 houses, would that be efficient use of land, or would there have to be 4 or 6 or 600? We've got a shortfall of, I think I saw a figure of 600 houses mentioned. That is our shortfall in the BLP in terms of housing numbers. If there were 600 houses on here, which you could probably put on that site, would that be efficient use of space? Or would there still be more that you would need to put on there? I really don't understand what the efficiency argument actually has to do with it, really, because it seems that if that is the argument, every single planning application that comes up, we could say it's not making efficient use of the space available, because you could always cram another 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 houses on the space. So I'm really flummoxed by what this efficient use of space is supposed to actually mean. In reality, 1 house is on the application here, and that is the only application we've got. For you to say we would like to see more houses is pie in the sky, because that's not what we have as an application. So whilst you might want more houses on it because you want to put houses everywhere in the borough, and we might need more houses, that's not what's before us. So, I really don't understand what it means.
I can come in here, and I do understand your concern, because quite often we are advising members not to speculate, to look at the application.
That's exactly what you're doing.
Well, I'll try and explain using some different tools if I can that might help the matter. So I think the starting point, given the need for housing, has to be paragraph 130. So I think you're saying it's not really, or it might be a bit vague. It's an inefficient use of land, but what do we want to see?
Yeah.
It's pie in the sky. It's not pie in the sky. So the NPPF has the main policies, national policies that we need to use for decision making. Alongside the NPPF, we also have the PPG, the planning practice guidance. So that gives a little more detail into what certain policies in the framework might mean. And there is a section on the efficient use of land. It's sort of how can a decision maker decide what is an efficient use of land or not? And there's certain tools that are available to local planning authorities, so officers, members, to help identify what appropriate densities are, because I think that's what we're looking at. We as officers are saying it's inefficient, it's not an appropriate density. You've asked the question, well, what would be?
Yeah.
And I want to take away the subjectiveness and bring it back to sort of policy and guidance. How can we determine what an appropriate density is. And I think there are tools we can use. There's a range of considerations that we can look at. Accessibility measures, that's one of them that's listed. Characterization studies, design, looking at character and urban form and grain. I think that's really important here, looking at the surrounding area. I think that's what's going to give you the appropriate density needed for the site. Assessments of market or site viability. There's a lot of tools set out in the PPG which make it more quantitative, technical, objective, rather than a speculation that officers and members might be having. And I want to come back on your other point about, you know, completely maximising the site. It's still in the green belt. It's a site, so it is going to be constrained. We've said that the quantum of development, about a 30% uplift, is appropriate, and I think that's probably what they would be left with. So I think we've got a lot of things to help us determine what an appropriate density would be. We've got the surrounding character of the area. We've got a quantum of development here that is appropriate development in the green belt. We know the floor area. So there's a lot to work with. There's a lot to tell us, a lot to tell the applicant, us as decision makers, you as decision makers tonight, what an appropriate density would be. Going back to the policy, it's not an efficient use of land because of all those factors, in officers' view.
I suppose it sits similar to when something's judged as being inappropriate development in greenbelt, because it doesn't reach the thing. Yeah. So I think it comes down to that binary choice that's made on weighting, I suppose. Do we have any more questions before we move into debate? We all agreed that we should move into debate now, a decision. So thank you very much, officers, for the bit of a grilling, but I think there's these slightly more off-piece things come in front of us. There'll be more of this to come. So who would like to start the debate? Councillor Amy Chiswick.
Thank you, Chair. I think following that lengthy question session, which was useful because it helped to sort of thrash things out, I think we can probably agree that one property is not the efficient use. However big that property may be, it's just one. What number is the best use for that site is immaterial, really, because that can be determined with a different application. But we know it's not one. I feel a bit like I've been sitting in a parallel universe where people are debating and justifying a millionaire mansion being a good use of space when we have a huge need for housing in the borough. We're so constrained anyway. We've got Crown Estate, we've got Eton College land, we've got Greenbelt, we've got the river. We are so constrained as to where we can actually build homes for people that when a site like this becomes available, to squander it by putting on one property with beautiful tennis. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful property. I have no issues with how it looks. It's glorious and I would love to live there. I'm sure we all would. But we cannot squander that land for just one home. It just baffles me that we were really even debating that. The fact that it's just completely against our local and national policy. That's the key thing there. It just shows a lack of awareness, I think, that we're just crying out for it. We've got 300 families living in temporary accommodation. I know they'd never be able to afford a property on this site and in this location, but that's the scale of the problem we're facing. So I cannot support this. I can't overturn or attempt to overturn officer recommendations, and I'm very happy to move to accept them.
Very cool there. I must remind you that it is in Greenbelt. It's not a free grey belt or an area for development. I know the point, but I don't think many of our homeless people can afford to rent or to buy a property that we built there. So I think we keep hitting this brick of we should be building social houses ourselves rather than hoping other people. Councillor Julia Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I hear what Councillor Teasey says, and I have to say I take a slightly different view. I think I'd be more than happy to put a motion forward to reject the motion and to accept the application.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. If you're going to suggest that, would you also consider conditions? Because there are a number of other issues apart from.
Of course, yes. Yeah, I'd absolutely be quite happy for it to be conditioned on all of the legal things that need to be agreed, and I'm sure the applicant will be more than happy to do that. But yeah, absolutely.
We can't condition because of the requirement for the bat surveys, the seasonal bat surveys. So it cannot be conditioned.
You can't condition a bat survey.
No.
But we can't approve a no bat survey.
Exactly.
Why is it here then? Well, we
so are you just telling us that we can't actually approve this?
No. So when I was responding to Councillor Teasey's questions earlier, the survey is required prior to decision making. We don't need it if members are to agree the officer recommendation, but you couldn't overturn the application tonight with effect. You need the section 106, and yes, we can't condition.
I think somebody needs to put a motion forward to defer this to another meeting then, because we can't make a decision.
Yeah.
If you can't make a decision.
I'll put forward that decision to defer this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chair, I'm actually
Sorry.
Councillor
Buckley.
I was going to second that motion. Julian Sharp, Councillor Sharp was putting through a motion to defer. I'll happy to second that motion.
So a motion to defer.
Yeah, positively.
Until the bat survey is completed.
Until all of the things that need to be sorted out have been sorted out. Yeah.
Okay. So that is.
Can I just step in there? I do need to point out that the decision is before us and we need to make a decision. I understand what you're saying about the deferring it for further reports, but those reports have to be done at particular times of the year, and we're quite a way away from that at the moment. So the fact is, I think what we're really looking at tonight is, do we refuse it on all the grounds that are before you or some of them? And then the applicant will need to come back with their bat survey. They haven't submitted it. They know that it's required and it's not been done. But to defer it, we do not defer applications because the application has come in and it's not sufficient for determining. What we will do is there's insufficient. We will give a reason for refusal. It's insufficient information to determine, because an application we are required to determine the application as submitted, and it hasn't got this information. So to defer it for maybe several months is not in accordance with the legislation. I don't know if Catriona wants to step in here and just explain the situation, if that would be helpful.
But the bare point is, we've had an application here that we're impossible to improve.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, no,
impossible to
you
improve.
can, if you don't agree with the refusal reasons, you can remove some of them. That there is that option. But with the bat survey, there is. The issue here is that there is no bat survey, and it's a requirement under the legislation.
So sorry.
Well, it has a bat survey, but it needs an additional one that can only take place at certain times of the year. I'm not sure.
So we're being told after all of this that we can't approve it because you don't have the bat survey, and yet we can't defer it until a bat survey could be done. So the only option we've got here is to refuse. That's what I'm hearing, that the only option we've got to make this evening is to refuse this.
The issue, the choices here are on what grounds do you wish to refuse. Come what may, the bat survey is not there, and there is insufficient
I'm sorry,
information.
this should not be here. This should not be here. This is absolutely.
If we can't proceed, you can never proceed with the bat survey, and we can't remove the bat survey from the requirements, then it is impossible to do anything apart from to follow the officer's recommendation.
I'm really not happy with that.
I think we are being told we could remove some options. So refusal reason one about it not being an efficient use of land, for example. I hear there's an argument about we could remove that reason for refusal, and then later on the applicants will have an easier time getting an application through.
For example, yes.
Would that be?
And so we refuse it and take out all the reasons for. We refuse it and take out all the reasons for refusal, so the applicant can come back and satisfy us that they've met all of those requirements. That's all right. Do they have to do that on appeal, or do they do that just by going through your normal process?
I'm really sorry. I'm trying to explain it as best I can here. But the fact is that you can't condition a VAT survey. It needs to be done. It needs to be completed. The VAT survey, the first VAT survey has been completed, but they need to do a particular type of second survey, which they haven't done. So it's identifying a high likelihood of. They've already identified one VAT risk there. The high likelihood, and under the legislation, we are required to seek that second survey. We have to, and we can't condition it because that second survey may show other things that go beyond the scope that prevent the application in any event. So because of that situation, come what may, the VAT survey issue has to remain as a reason for refusal, as does the failure to complete the Section 106. So those will have to remain because they're technical matters and they have to stay in there. But other reasons for refusal are something that you can look at, and something we've discussed already.
So, Councillor Buckley?
Chair, I think we've got to defer it for legal opinion. I just do not think how we can make a decision with what we're hearing from officers tonight.
I mean, a very clear one. It is impossible for us to go against the officer's recommendation.
Yeah, I think we need legal to come in and advise us.
Katrina could confirm that.
There's no way forward this.
So
Hello. Sorry, I hadn't unmuted there. A BAT survey, the members have the application. It's had to come to committee because of the size of the dwelling house. You have the officer's report and the reasons for refusal set out in the report. The legal advice is echoes, and I would reiterate what Louise has said. It's not appropriate to condition the BAT survey. BATs are protected in law. It's a criminal offence to interfere with the habitat of bats. The BAT survey is required, the outcome of that second stage BAT survey is required to ensure that the plans for the development are appropriate in relation to those as a protected species. And I appreciate members' frustration around that, but the application has to be determined by the local planning authority, and it's in front of members to be determined.
So, very plain. Councillor Davis.
I think I might have a solution to move this along. It seems there's two camps here, one but want to refuse for all 6 reasons in the report, and the others only want to refuse for points 2 through 6. Perhaps if one of us put a motion in for refusing on all grounds of all 6 in the report, and if that passes, the meeting ends, and if it doesn't, someone else will put in another motion to refuse on grounds 2 through 6. Does that make sense? Planning? Yeah, okay, very well.
Chair. So I'm happy to, my movement of accepting officer recommendations is to accept officer recommendation as it stands, to accept all the reasons for refusal, particularly the insufficient use of land as complying with policy.
So, could you repeat your motion so I can pick it up?
Oh,
you're on the same motion, yeah?
Yeah, I didn't actually. I was going to second.
So we've got a proposer and a seconder to accept everything and to reject the application in line with the officer's recommendation. Any other propositions?
Sorry, I've been trying to. Sorry, I've been trying to come in. It seems like quite a long time ago now. I just wanted to check, almost like why this has got to this stage in the process, because it feels like this is an incomplete application, and I'm kind of sorry. I know we've slightly moved on, but would like to understand how it's come to panel.
It's in the constitution that major applications have to come to panel regardless of the recommendation?
Sorry, that's not quite the question. It's that this is the stage of, it's at the stage of the process. It feels like it's an incomplete application. So how has it come this, it feels like it's too early.
Okay, to explain this, to give the context, when we validate an application, we validate it against national validation requirements. That means that quite often we don't have sufficient information coming in with the application. One of the things I'm in the middle of doing and being supported by the team is to do a list of local validation requirements, which will hopefully prevent this happening going forward. But at the moment, we quite often get applications that have to be refused on insufficient information, that they're not fit for purpose. It's not, we are not encouraged by any stretch by government or through the MPPF to look for amendments. That's not appropriate. We are obliged by legislation and by national government to look at the application that's been submitted to us. And if it doesn't meet par and if it doesn't have sufficient information, then we refuse on that basis. We will say insufficient information, because that's what we're being asked to consider, and that's what's before us tonight. There just isn't enough there.
Okay, so from a process point of view, this was what was submitted at a particular point in time in the past, and this is now the meeting that it results in it coming to in the state it's in.
I mean, usually you'll see applications, major applications, where they've signed up to planning performance agreements. And that allows us to do a lot of toing and froing during the course of the application. So that's why this might seem quite odd as a major, but it's only a major because of its size. It is just one dwelling house. So you wouldn't normally, you rarely see one dwelling houses with this type of issue because they're normally refused under delegated authority. So it's a bit of an oddity in that respect. But to have insufficient information or to require further, anything that's going to take us beyond what I call a bit of tinkering that takes a week or two to sort out, fine, we're flexible with that. But when you're talking about several months to carry out additional surveys, when had they done the first survey and picked up they needed to do an additional one, perhaps that could have been done before the case was submitted. And then we would have had sufficient information. So I think there's several factors that are leading into this, but really and truly, there just isn't enough information on the protected species here. So that's really where that's coming from. Does that help clarify it a bit for you?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So basically, in thinking of it in another way, if we consider each of the reasons for refusal as of today, as they are, we can almost consider them sort of like separately, but like, do each of those 6 hold? And in terms of how we've tested them, I think it seems like for me today, looking at the application, each of the 6 do hold. That some of them are more overcomable than others in the future, but as of today, all 6 hold.
If I can just add for a moment, things like the 106, yes, they've expressed, they have been clear that they're willing to pay that, but we haven't had sight of a draft 106. And furthermore, it's not normal practice to waste anybody's time to progress a 106 when there's an in principle refusal reason. So that's why it hasn't been progressed. It's not because we've been stubborn. It's far more to do with what's reasonable.
Right. So effectively, that's been driven by point 1, the inefficient use of land. So that's correct,
because it's an in principle issue. That's why it hasn't been mapped up.
I think the position really is, isn't it, that the incomplete application elements, particularly the bats, is the reason this is stuck and we're unable to make any other determination but to follow the officer's recommendation. With the understanding it will probably be resubmitted at some point when the paperwork's complete, I should think. But something we can't decide at that point. Councillor Buckley?
Yeah, I think we're going to go through to motions now. I think that, I just want to make some points on record of what I've heard tonight and how discriminatory I think some of the comments have been regarding this is an application by anyone, could be any planning application, whether it be whatever size, whatever it is. And I've heard comments about size, size of the property, which, I find very, very difficult to accept. I know Councillor Tizzy has a different opinion, but I think we both agree that social housing is the only way forward. And unfortunately, the council's not in a position to build up thousands of homes of social housing, but, maybe we could put a condition in there to build some social housing on this one, not on the site, but will pay for somewhere else. But you know, I really have some serious points I want to put on record here. And you know, I just think about, you know, the fact of Windsor Castle. We sit here with this lovely property over here that was built in 1069, and God forbid if that came before our planning application in this day and age. I dare to think what would happen. You know, we are a panel, and it is our we make decisions tonight. Officers put their recommendations forward, and we're here to make decisions. And I hear from the public all the time about, you know, how we just go along with officers' recommendations. And I agree with everyone here. This shouldn't be before the panel this time. I really find this debate very, very difficult from a policy point of view, which we're here to decide on, and a moral point of view. So, you know, I just want to put that on record, really, and we move forward on to motions, Chair.
Councillor Julian Sissy.
Thank you. This has been quite interesting, and I think both things that have come to us have been a bit strange, as it were. They've been sort of very weird ones. This, especially with the new MPPF, actually, here's an application. Oh no, we're refusing it. It just felt really very strange. On the reasons, I think 3 to 6. I think others have said it. These are technical things that are not insurmountable. Silver 106 and the other related agreements. I think that they're sort of ones that, yes, we can sort of move forward on, but yes, obviously we have to refuse on those bases. But they're not insurmountable ones. That I think I share the frustration on number 2 about the bats. I think that it's I mean, I know it's start of March at the moment, and it's sort of mid-May, isn't it, is when you can start having these, so it's a couple of months away. I don't like being told, oh no, you can only vote this way, because I think that's, you know, it does feel that this is a waste of our time. So yes, if there's anything that yes, I recognise that there's a lot that applicants have to give the planning team, but if there's anything we can do to sort of push applicants, you know, make sure that it doesn't come to us until we've got as much as we're going to get, and if they don't, then that's fine. But so if there's anything that can be done about that, that would be good. Before, I was just going to talk about point 1, but do you want to cut in?
If it's okay, I was just going to jump in. I've nearly finished drafting up the local validation requirements. In there, it will set this out in detail. And what it will mean is that the applications will be assessed against, and there's a lot of local validation requirements, 30 plus, and those validation requirements will go out to public consultation. They are going to go forward to be adopted, hopefully by May. Once they're in place, then applications that are missing things, which we get a lot of, that will cease to happen. And that means that the applicants can then liaise with us, our support staff, to work out what they need to do. And fingers crossed, we won't get this kind of problem cropping up anywhere near as frequently as we're currently experiencing.
That's reassuring. Can I just finish on my point, on point 1, which is so thank you very much, Louise. That's very reassuring. That's good. So the big discussion has been on point 1, this idea, you know, one large dwelling. I can't remember when it was, about a year ago or whenever it was, we had an application that came forward, which was a hotel up in Datchet, and I remember that it's Greenbelt, and the rules are very, very tough, and it looks like potentially that the balance might have shifted with the new rules, which actually, because there was a certain amount of leeway in terms of, well, you can have a little bit more a little bit more square footage, things like that. Now, we're not talking about that. Let's not unpick that again. But just the point that Councillor Buckley made a bit earlier about this economic wealth. If this were a hotel that we were, and this was some luxury hotel, I think we might be having a different discussion, because it's one of those things that, oh wow, you know, in terms of economic development, we can't sniff at something wonderful as it's something. On the other hand, this isn't a hotel. this is a private dwelling. And I know there's been some speculation about, well, you know, you'd need to have X £100 million in the bank to be, and therefore you must be a, you know, some oligarch, and therefore you will bring a lot to the, to the economy. I think that's all speculation. I really do. I think I'm afraid we've talked about a lot about the square meterage and things like that, and without giving an actually answer, I was trying to do the maths, as it were, and it looks like high numbers about, high numbers about 40 and low numbers about 15 or something like that, somewhere in that ballpark. So it won't be 100. It'll be something lower than that, but let's not decide now. But it does appear it's not one. So I think I will be going with officer recommendations on this to refuse on all grounds.
Well, I think a good point, DB point would be when you've got a red flag thing like bats incomplete, it might be worth mentioning that right at the start, because we could have saved ourselves a good long chat here about things, because it was never going to go anywhere without the bat survey at all. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just like to make the point on bats, because I think with 50 or 15 or 20 houses on the bats, are going to be a lot worse off than one property that's been there for 455 years, supporting the bats and their breeding. But I think it is very unfortunate, as the Chair said and other people have said here. And Louise, I thank you for clarifying that point on the documents that you're working on in the background. And I wish you had them in place before tonight's meeting. And I do not think this would have come to our meeting. It shouldn't have come. And on that basis, I think we need to be supportive of you and turn down this recommendation purely on the basis that it shouldn't have come yet until it got sorted out. And at the same time, the applicant making efforts to sort it out, I think officers shouldn't bring up applications to us until they've been sorted, because this is what happens. And I think it's wrong. So even though I support it, and I'm good, I really look forward to you bringing that document forward. I know you're under pressure and you couldn't do it before now, and I welcome it. It's just a very unfortunate situation.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you. I don't think we've ever had an application in where we haven't been able to either refuse or accept. And this is the first one where we can only refuse because of the circumstances.
It's great crescent newts on Ascot golf course. Remember that.
Well, if you're talking about newts, I mean, I could talk in detail about newts, but bats certainly down that road, it's almost impossible not to have bats, I would have thought. I mean, they're all over the place. So, it doesn't surprise me that we need to do a survey on bats, but, the options that we've got aren't exactly right. So I'm really not happy about this.
I think anybody else that's going to add to it, we've all agreed we've got to go with the officer's recommendation. Councillor Tinsley?
Thank you. I think it's really important to remember that we wouldn't have been here usually, because this wouldn't have ever, the officers would have just dismissed this because of lack of information if it had been able to be done by officers. But because it's the sheer size of it, it's had to come to panel. That's the frustration. Actually, this is only one property, and they could have just said, no, we haven't got the information, and chucked it out ages ago. I think the other thing I just wanted to say is that all this speculation of we've got one property on the table, and if we don't accept this, there might not be anything else. If we did accept this, there definitely won't be anything better coming down the line. So, yeah.
I'll tell you now, I'm a member of the Bat Appreciation Society, and I've really taken umbrage at some of the comments being made here tonight.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just on bats, because I've just looked this up because I was curious. Their numbers have actually declined very significantly over recent decades. So, which is why they're protected, and they're also called an indicator species, which again is an education point for myself. Well, yes, but so that is why they're protected, is that their numbers have been declining. So, I would like to, I think, have we said, Amy, has your motion been seconded? Yes. Okay. Cool. So I'm in line with that. It's fine.
If we've all went out of road here with this, and we're ready. Nobody else has got anything to add. We have a proposition from. Oh, I've got one more. Go on then.
I'm sorry, but it's such one of these meetings, isn't it? You know, I tend to, we've got to make a decision here, and obviously we've got the bat issue. So of the 6 reasons why, I would go with the bat issue being the one left in it, and remove all the others, and then go forward with that. But can that be done? Okay, fine.
Without bats, the back thing, there would have been
Just go through the
a
process.
choice, you know, but there isn't. So
Yeah.
we have the proposition for Councillor Devon Davis and the seconded by Councillor Amy Tizzy. So there's a way round.
Yeah. Amy's
Who's that?
proposal.
Who's proposing? You're proposing. Sorry, I thought you'd come first this time. So here we go. We have the proposition to accept the operative recommendation to reject the application before us. If we can proceed, is there anything else to add before we go any further? No, I think we're okay. And so if you can proceed, Kim.
Thank you, Chair. So we have a motion proposed by Councillor Amy Teasy and seconded by Councillor Davis to refuse planning permission for all the reasons given in section 15 of the report, which is in line with officer recommendation. I will now go to a named vote. Councillors are being asked to vote for refusal, against refusal, or abstain. Councillor Buckley.
Against.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Knowles.
For.
Councillor Sharp.
Against.
Councillor Amy Teasy.
For.
Councillor Julian Teasy.
For.
Councillor Wilson.
For.
So that's 5 for, 2 against. The motion is carried.
Thank you very much indeed for persevering and the public for persevering this evening. An interesting debate. I think you'll all agree. We now need to carry on to the next agenda item. As I turn over the page, we'll wake my computer up again as well. Planning applications, appeals received. Planning appeals received and planning decision report. I've got yours there, mine won't wake up. We read the items there, the normal collection of dismissed or accepted. Does everybody agree that it's as seen? Agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for persevering this evening. Every planning meeting is a journey, and this has been an interesting one. So thank you all very much.